Hi, this is Black Sheep Family History, stories of our not-so-illustrious ancestors and how to find them. I'm your host, Janet Hall Werner. I'm a lawyer and I worked as an advocate on Capitol Hill for 25 years until 2016 when I chucked that to pursue my true calling as a professional genealogist. I specialize in finding the stories hidden in the records, as well as DNA, immigration and migration, and research pretty much anywhere east of the Mississippi and some places west. In this series, I'll be talking to other genealogists, as well as telling some of my own Black Sheep stories that I've uncovered over the years. Black Sheep Family History is available as a podcast if you're on the go, and it's also on YouTube, where I show you the records and the pictures that go along with the story. Search for and subscribe to Black Sheep Family History wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to my Black Sheep Family History channel on YouTube. If you have a Black Sheep story about one of your ancestors that you'd like to tell, or you'd like me to tell, or if you need research help, please drop me a note at janet@blacksheepfamhist.com. Okay, today we have Lori Samuelson with us. And Lori, why don't you introduce yourself, and then you can tell me how you got interested in this story.
Sure, Janet. I'm Lori Samuelson with Genealogy at Heart. I am a retired 44-year educator and counselor. And when I retired, I turned my part-time genealogy business into a full-time professional business. And I specialize in sensitive subjects. So people come to me. My most unique one was a man who couldn't find any information about his grandfather, and no one would ever talk about it. And it turned out he was a serial killer. So I do have some interesting stories. Can't share all of them because they're client based, and there is privacy there. But when I discover my own black sheeps, I really do enjoy them because I think they just resonate. Every family has them. Some are just eccentric, some are mild embarrassments, but the one that I'm going to share with you today is much, much more.
Okay, yeah, what I read was fascinating. So how did you start becoming interested in this story?
Well, I knew a little bit about Charles Leeson Landfair. My dad was always very reticent and didn't share much about anything with me on regards to his family, as opposed to my mom's side that I thought I knew everything because my grandmother was one of those ladies that was an excellent storyteller. So after my dad passed, I started researching that side of the family. The only clue that I had about Charles was he seemed to be my dad was seemed to be very proud that he had a physician in the family. Now, I do have questions that I wish I had researched this earlier, like we often do. My dad would have been 20 when Charles died, or 19. And he
And
must
and I'm
never have.
sorry, what was the relationship between your dad and Charles,
Charles was his uncle.
his uncle?
Um, yeah, his great uncle. He's my
Oh,
second great
okay,
uncle.
he's your
And
second grade.
yeah, I don't think he ever met the man, though they both lived in Indiana. They're not actually close. But he was just so proud that he had a physician in the family. Clearly, he didn't know the real story of Charles. And so I began, doing general research on that family line, connected with some disconnected family members. And one of them said, "Oh, you're really going to have to investigate Charles because I had a great aunt that remembered Charles when she was 16 when he died, and her only comment to me was, 'He is a mean man.'" So that kind of perked me up. And I have investigated Charles over the years. The interesting thing is, he is the person that has the most newspaper articles of anyone in my family or anybody that I've ever researched. I found over 250 different articles, some of
Wow.
them, and there, if you counted the reprints, it would be a whole lot more. His stories were found in newspapers as far as Australia.
Wow.
So this past April, I was attending the a genealogy conference at Allen County Public Library, and there was a table by Wells County Genealogy Society, and a man was standing behind it, and I thought of Charles, and I said, I have a black sheep ancestor that was from your region. And the man smiled and said, it must have been Dr. Landfair. And I almost collapsed. So this man's renown has spread across generations.
Wow.
So I told the gentleman, I'm going to have to go back this summer and revisit everything and put it in chronological order and write up an article about it because I had bits and pieces, but I never put the whole story together. And that's kind of what I accomplished, and that's what I shared with you.
Right. Well, it's a great story. So why don't you, he was born in 1855
Yes,
in
November. Yeah, November 23rd.
Mercer County. So why don't you talk a little bit about his early life and then we'll get into
Sure.
his.
It was relatively uneventful. He did have some early losses. He lost a brother in the Civil War and another brother that likely died from disease. He was orphaned at the age of 16. He was one of nine children. He was the eighth child. Now, it's interesting to me that when the parents they both died within a couple months of each other. When they died, the younger one was taken in by the oldest daughter, his sibling,
Mhm.
and she had married, had her own family. It makes sense. But the next couple oldest siblings also were on their own, but they didn't take in Charles. You find him as a boarder. And then if you've looked at the larger relationships of the family, you realize that he was boarding with a family member. It was a first cousin on a different line. So, why he ended up as a boarder, he quickly got a job and became a teacher locally, which is where he met his first wife, Rebecca Kuhn. And really, she should have been aware that this marriage was not going to last because instead of getting the marriage license, Charles sent a farm laborer who was boarding with his cousin to go get the documents for him. He couldn't be bothered getting his own marriage license. I think that's kind of telling of how this was going to go.
Right. Yeah, so they she filed for divorce soon after.
Well, they ended up, it seemed like it started out well. They were both teaching. And then, as soon as the children started coming within a year of the marriage, so, in those days, you couldn't teach if you were
Right.
a mother. So she became a housewife. He continued teaching. They had two children real close in age. And then problems began. And
Mhm.
it likely was his alcohol consumption
Yes.
because that was the first time that he had a court appearance for alcohol. She took the two children, a boy and a girl, to live with her parents because you can find them in records together. But they reunified and they had a third child, and things went downhill. That was the first time that she took him to court for a divorce, was in 1887. So it was their second split, but the first divorce case.
Okay.
And he acknowledged that everything she said against him was in fact true. This is
Right.
the only time he really ever admitted he did something. And he promised her father that he would stop drinking, stop gambling, and start supporting the family. And so they reunified now for the third time, but it didn't last. In September of 1888, she took him back for divorce again. And this time, I believe the impetus was um, he had kidnapped their son. She had the children in school. And for whatever reason, Charles showed up at school, told the teacher that Rebecca told me to take our son out. And so the child was released and they went on a jaunt together. He just never bothered to tell Rebecca this. So when she came to school that afternoon to pick up the kids, that's when the teacher said, "But your husband said." And I think she had had enough at this point. And so you see, within a few days, the child was brought back unharmed. And there was really no rational reason why he did what he did. She had enough and she filed for divorce. She had a number of witnesses, and the divorce was granted in December of that year. So it was a quickie divorce, especially for that period, and especially when it was initiated by a woman, because in
There
Ohio,
was
that
was
really
there an
didn't
assault and
fly.
battery issue with this one
She had not filed a police report on it, but it was brought up in the
in the
court
divorce?
records.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
he hit her
my
on the
point
back
there
of the
was
head.
that he was, I mean, he was abusive, physically
It,
abusive to
exactly. He
his
hit her
wife.
on the back of the head with a stick,
Yeah,
causing a severe headache. That was, I don't mean to demean it at all because I think
right.
that's horrible, but that was the only time he hit her. He gets
Mhm.
much worse with the next three wives.
Right. Right. We're actually going to take a little break here. If you're enjoying this episode, please consider supporting the series to keep new episodes coming. There are 5, count them, 5 different ways that you can support the Black Sheep Family History podcast and YouTube video series. Number 1, first and foremost, subscribe to my channel, Black Sheep Family History on YouTube. Number 2, tell your friends. The easiest way to do that is to share this video on Facebook with a note telling your friends it's awesome. Number 3, buy me a coffee. Just go to buymeacoffee.com and search for Black Sheep Family History, or look for the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes and buy me a coffee. Number 4, join my Black Sheep Society. For just $5 per month, you can get bonus Black Sheep Society content each week, additional mini Black Sheep stories, and other content that can help you find the Black Sheep in your family tree. Look for a link to the Black Sheep Society in the show notes. And last is number 5. Rate and review this video and drop me a comment or any suggestions in the comments. Okay, we're back. So the first wife, they get a divorce, and the kids are with the first wife, of course. And then what happens next?
Well, he decides he's going to start anew and he's going to move to the next county over, which happens to be the next state also. So he moves from Mercer County, Ohio, to Wells County, Indiana. And there, in April of 1889, he opens a medical practice above Davenport Drugs. Now, this is really interesting because he never went to medical school. He claimed that he had went to the Cincinnati School of Medicine, and he filed a business license in Wells County, but he never bothered to file a state license to be a physician's. And that makes sense because Wells County wouldn't think anybody would have done that. They never checked
Right.
because really, who thinks like this? And why he picked Cincinnati Medical School? Well, there was a little hint, though it doesn't make a lot of sense either. I have pulled his records from Indiana, and they were well aware from back in the day that he never went to the school because they were unable to verify his attendance. I wasn't able to verify it either. I tried a few years ago and they said there is no record of this man. I thought maybe back in the day, records got mixed up or whatever, and now with digitization, he'd show up, but he didn't. He attached to his record in Indiana is a record for a legitimate physician from Indiana who did attend Cincinnati Medical College at that same time period. And it would have been about his age. The man's name was George Landis. Now, I don't know if it was a clerical error that somebody in Indianapolis attached the wrong record to Charles's paperwork, or if he submitted that and claimed to be that man, but the names don't match. But those records are together.
It's interesting. They would be together alphabetically.
Yes.
Landfair and Landis, they must have been
Yeah.
right next to each other in alphabetically. Maybe
Yeah.
something got
God, that's why it could have been a
him.
clerical error,
Yeah,
but he never proved that he went. And they were
right.
supposed to prove. they had to have some record to show proof, and that man showed his proof from the medical college. So the colleges did do that in those days. I don't understand it, but and this is key that he got the license for the county, but not for the state, because that will come back
Mhm.
in a little bit. So he quickly marries again for the second time a woman named Laura Conant, and she's something of a mystery woman. We know that she was born and raised in Wells County. Her parents were farmers locally, and they married in April of 1890. And I don't know if she became ill or if it was due to him, but in December of 1890, she writes a will on December 11th, leaving all of her personal belongings and property to her father, not to Charles. And she must have died by the 3rd of January of 1891, so in that 2-week window, because her father takes Charles to court and says, I want the property. My daughter gave you $500 to invest, and I want the property. Well, Charles had some kind of story. I mean, he could really talk his way out of things. And he convinced her father and the court that there either wasn't property or the property belonged to him. And the court case was dismissed. Well, the next month, her father takes him back to court, says he has new information that Charles lied. Charles convinces the court for a change of venue, and he gets moved to Adams County, the county to the north of where they were living. Now, that's really interesting because nothing has to do with Adams County. The property is located in Wells. All of the people involved in the sale lived in Wells. So, why the change of venue? We don't know. But in Adams County, the court sided with Charles. So we see the father now in law come back in May to Wells County requesting the court reopen the case. And they said, no, it's a done deal. It was finished in Adams. We're not hearing this again. But it wasn't the end of the story. In June, the man that Charles had purchased the property from, you see, Charles, instead of putting Laura's name on the deed, only put his own. And so the man now was suing Charles because he hadn't finished paying for the property. And so the court had had enough. They said, Charles, you're going to sell that property, pay him off, we're done with this. And he finally sells it in December of that year, makes a $400 profit, and her father gets nothing.
And they were only married for what, less than a year?
Yeah, they were married about 8 months.
Yeah, before she died.
And we don't know her death date. We don't know where she was buried. There's no death certificate. He should have signed it. He signed other things at that time period. So the whole thing is just odd.
That's very odd. Okay, what happened after that? So
Well,
he's done
he
with wife
marries
two.
quick.
Yeah.
He marries again. This time he marries a 17-year-old servant by the name of Maud Ida Howard in July of 1892. So 6 months after he sold that property, he's married again. And this time, she was actually the one that really was the first to tell the authorities he was operating an illegal medical practice. Why did she do that? Because they had a love-hate relationship. It was volatile. They would fight and kiss and make up. In fact, it got so bad, one newspaper article even was taking bets on how long it would be before she rescinded the latest divorce record, because she was always claiming she was going to divorce him. She eventually, well, maybe did or didn't. There is no divorce record ever to be found, but that's in a little bit. Now, it's really interesting because his best man was a man named George Bratton, and George was his step nephew. His Charles's sister, one of his sisters, and her husband had moved to Bluffton. And the sister had divorced in Ohio also and was married second to a man who had children from the first marriage, and that was George Bratton. And George was known to also have a problem with alcohol. He was divorced by his wife because purportedly he was drunk every Saturday night. So it's kind of an interesting best man story there. Now, 19 days after the wedding, for whatever reason, George sues his sister in court. It's unclear over what. The court sides with her. This was George's stepmom. But these ladies, though he treated all women terribly, they always forgave him and seemed to forget about his behavior because when his sister died years later, he signed her death certificate. Now, he had another sister and a brother-in-law that were also living in Bluffton at the time, but they used a different physician throughout their life. So not all of the family was on board with what he was doing.
When did trouble start with this couple?
Well, the trouble started at the beginning because of his intoxication. There were
Right.
lots of charges for assault and battery, mainly on her, but not just her. He was rabble-rousing in local saloons as well. Lots of property disputes. He wasn't just a physician, he was also kind of playing a realtor status there. And a lot of public intoxication. He was a mean drunk and a very loud and boisterous one. He'd forget which house was his and try to break and enter into his neighbor's house. Or if he couldn't get into his home because he was fumbling, with the door, he would stand outside and curse loudly and scream. And the neighbors were at their wits' end with him. Now, I really think the marriage was starting to be over really early on in 1893. And the reason I say that is he started claiming he had patients out of town. And he would have to take the train to Montpelier, which was quite a distance. Why? It's not like there wasn't enough to do in the area that he was living, right? We don't know the name of that whoever the patient was, but he did a follow-up visit 3 weeks later. And he claims that he was standing at the train depot waiting for the night train to take him back to Bluffton when three men approached him and beat him with a billy club. Now, according to his story, he was knocked down, but he was so enraged and he had such superhuman strength. He jumped up and he went after them, and they feared for their life and they ran away. Right, Charles. He ended up with just a small cut by his ear. Now, if you were attacked by three men at night with a billy club, I think you'd have more damages than that. So he never seemed to go back to Montpelier. I suspect he was seeing someone else at the time because we know of October of 1896. He was visiting the home, a rental home of two fortune tellers by the name of Lily and Belle Wilding. They had gotten run out of Bluffton and had set up a new establishment in nearby Stringtown, which was about 4 miles from Bluffton. Well, the person who rented the home to them became very suspicious. You see, they said for $2, they would tell you about your past, about your present, which I would think you would already know about, and about the future. But the problem was they couldn't tell their own future. So the man realized something's up because only men are coming to have their fortunes read, and they're only coming in the evening. This is very odd. So he went to the authorities. He talked to a constable and a marshal who decided to do a stakeout. One stood at the front door, one stood at the back door, and then they decided to move in together. And what did they find? The two ladies with three men, Charles being one of them. Well, Charles made a real quick exit. Over his shoulder, he said, "Take the medicine as directed," and he was gone. Now, the ladies get arrested and taken to night court. The mayor was the judge, and they insist that they were not doing anything but fortune telling. And so the mayor says, "Okay, I'm not going to dispute it. You're going to be housed in jail until you come up with $48 in court costs." Well, their friend, whoever their friend was, never showed up with the cash, and they were getting tired of waiting in jail. So they admitted that they were operating a home of prostitution. And so at that point, the law decides, well, now we're going to bring in the other three gentlemen that were with you. Now, two of the men admitted why they really were there, but Charles was adamant he was there on a professional call only. He got a guilty verdict. He took it to a higher court, a circuit court, and they overcame that charge and he was a free man. So Charles just had a way with the law and he got out of most of this trouble. Not all of it, as you'll see in a minute, but for the by and large, he was able to wheedle his way through the system.
Yeah, it's remarkable. At least early on, he seemed to be able to dodge a whole lot of bullets.
Yeah.
Okay, what happened after that?
Well, we know that in October of 1899, he brought a woman he called his wife, unnamed, to the Cottage Hotel. I suspect it wasn't Ida. I think Ida was long gone at this point. We do know that 6 months or a few months after that, in June of 1900, during the census, they are living apart. She claims, she's now working as a servant again, that she was divorced, but I can find no divorce record anywhere. He claims he was a widow. He is now 13 years younger, and he only had two previous marriages. So he wanted to completely forget her. He is now claiming he's the widow of Laura Conant, and like I didn't have this last relationship at all. But he then spends the next 20 years in and out of jail. He marries really quickly a woman by the name of Mary Emma Tremp, who also had been a servant, and they marry in December of 1900. And this was the only church wedding that he ever had. It was at the United Methodist Church of Bluffton. You'd think he found religion and would make a turnaround, but no, that wasn't Charles' thing. So at this point, it was also a volatile relationship, but they stuck together through his death. And she is buried alongside him. So they had a long-term relationship, but it was also a lot of court cases about his beating of her. Now, he was really well known across the Midwest first because he was the physician for a murderer and the person that was murdered. And since there was no HIPAA laws back in the time, he spilled the beans on what was really going on in the relationship with a father-in-law and his son-in-law. The man was named John Terrell. He was the murderer. And on the witness stand, Charles admitted that they were drinking buddies and that he was also the physician for the murdered man, Melvin Wolfe. Melvin had come to see Charles because he wanted Charles's help in getting an abortion, which was illegal in Indiana at the time and still is. And he wanted that assistance from him. And nobody raised an eyebrow about this at all during the trial because everyone was focused on the main event, which was the murder. So we do know that Charles's brother, Robert, was the defense attorney. And when Charles was called to the stand, he was asked, "What medical school did you attend?" Now, he was real swift. I mean, you could tell he had smarts because he didn't perjure himself. This is a quote. "I studied in Cincinnati. I was there for a period of 3 terms." Okay, what'd you do, Charles? Buy a medical book and sit under a tree and read it? Like, you didn't answer the question. They asked what school you attended, but nobody questioned this. So he got away with stuff all the time. But things were starting to heat up in his life. And the first was in July of 1904. He was drinking at a local saloon. And I think he was one of those guys that partied from one place to the next because I have the name of several saloons he was at that night. So where this event occurred, I can't tell you. But he was drinking, and a baker, a local baker by the name of Samuel Holliday, shows up, sees Charles, and he's got a vendetta against him. He punches Charles in the eye, and Charles hits the floor. He's got a big shiner. He gets up, Samuel hits him in the other eye, two shiners. He's on the floor. And at this point, Samuel starts, the newspaper quotes, knocked the stuffing out of him. So if it wasn't for bystanders, it's likely that Charles would have been seriously injured, if not killed. What was the cause behind this? Well, according to Holliday, Charles had insulted his wife. Charles had visited her when she was home alone, and that was scandalous for this day and age. So he was going to be the chivalrous man and beat the stuffing out of somebody that was causing a rumor about his wife. Now, there had been a very violent quarrel between his latest wife, Mary, and Charles about this time. And you could hear her screaming. The neighbors honestly thought he was killing her. So they called the marshal. The marshal arrives and he finds Charles calmly sitting in an easy chair. And he asks Charles, "Where's Mary?" And Charles' response was, "If you don't leave immediately, I have a very big, mean dog that I will sick on you." And the marshal looks calmly at Charles and says, "I'm here to check on Mary, and I will do that. And if the dog is a bother, I will shoot it." And so he goes to the stairs, and Mary is now appearing at the top of the stairs with this large bulldog next to her, wagging its tail as friendly as can be. And so the marshal asks her, "Are you okay?" And she says, "Oh, I'm fine. Charles came home drunk and he demanded that I leave. So I was packing my belongings and he changed his mind, but I continued packing and that made him angry. So he started ripping my clothes off. But I'm fine now and I'm not leaving." And so the marshal said, "Okay." And he turned to leave. And as he passed Charles, Charles said, "I will give you $100 to tell me who is the neighbor that called on me." Now, the marshal did not accept the bribe. And the marshal knew that Charles was a dangerous drunk. So he had brought backup. He had his father standing at the door. So this relationship is interesting because you're going to see that Mary comes through for Charles at the end, no matter how many beatings she had sustained. Now, there's a whole lot of stories about bulldogs, but I don't think we have time for all of them, so we're going to skip it. But Charles was enamored with animals, especially his two horses. And each, they were race horses, and he loved them so much that when they died, he had a special funeral for each of them with 10 pallbearers, and he had them buried, arranged to have a burial site at a local farm where he had handcrafted for them hemlock caskets. Now, what's sad to me is I know where the horses are buried, but I don't know where the second wife is buried. His priorities were just so different than what we would think about today. Um, anyway, the story gets more convoluted because I was confused when I first discovered that the grand jury was going to indict him for an abortion charge. But it wasn't due to that trial with Lucy Wolfe. It was with a new woman, Frances Beeler. And I couldn't understand, why did they allow this illegal abortion and not even flinch in December of 1903, but by December of 1904, it was a big deal. And it wasn't really anything to do with morals or politics. It had to do with alcohol. And I only realized this when I did a broader research of that community. You see, there was this man by the name of George Cotton, and his nickname was the Temperance Tornado. And he was determined to make Wells County a dry county. Now, at that time, they had 35 saloons, and they could open on Sunday, they just couldn't serve alcohol. And this was the case in Indiana when I was a small child. They weren't allowed to serve any alcohol. Well, George wanted to put them out of business. So what he would do is he'd make his rounds to all of these saloons. He would order an alcoholic beverage on Sunday, and he would record the name of the place, the server, and what he ordered. Typically, it was a beer. So He then brought all of his evidence to the grand jury. And the grand jury, he found 32 establishments that served him out of 35, which kind of tells you the state of the community and how they followed the Indiana laws. Now, they threw one of the counts out because the server refused to give him his name. Smart man. Now, I guess that Charles got just sucked into this whole alcohol deal when the Temperance Tornado learned about a recent court to a trial that was going to come where Charles was accused of medical malpractice in regards to an operation. It was very vague. It didn't say what kind of operation or what he did wrong, but the man knew that the woman's name was Frances Beeler because she had gotten a law team together and she was suing Charles for $5,000 because in her head he was worth 10, so she wanted half of what he had. And so I suspect that the Temperance Tornado spoke with Francis, and that's how Charles got put in with the same grand jury. It really had nothing to do with the abortion, it had everything to do with alcohol. If you're going to try to make a dry county, you're going to get the biggest known drunk out of there, which is what was behind this issue. Now, Frances Beeler, when she appeared before the grand jury, was a not a very complacent witness. She drove those poor guys nuts. Her story ranged from, I know more about law than you do, I have a law book at home, to crying, to laughter. Her original story changed very dramatically from that grand jury to when the court case was eventually heard in September of the following year. What she claimed was, in my words, she was doctor shopping looking for somebody to perform an abortion because she realized she was pregnant. She was 20, unmarried, and that's how she was going to take care of it. And when she finally reached Charles, he said for 25 bucks he would do the job. And that was okay, it seemed, with the grand jury. They told her they weren't going to prosecute her at all. But was she suing him? And she lied and said she wasn't. And at this point, they didn't know what to believe with her story because they knew, in fact, she had already had this case set up. So they told her they were going to put her in jail until she told the truth. And then she admitted that, yes, she was going to sue him. So the case was heard the following September, and it was a hot mess from the beginning. He had to remain in jail, but they allowed him to continue practicing medicine in jail. So that became his new office. The folks would just come and visit him in his cell. He would write prescriptions and he would accept their payment. And
That's
I don't
crazy.
know, I don't, it's crazy. It's Indiana. I'm going to be honest with you. It's just a wild kind of place. So when she got on the stand, her whole testimony changed from the grand jury. And I don't know why, with the slew of lawyers that he had hired, nobody poked holes on this. I mean, this was long before Me Too, so I don't get why they didn't really cross-examine her. But I guess because they had originally told her, we're not prosecuting you, they let it go easy. But her story now was, she was just a naive 20-year-old who had been raised motherless on a farm and didn't know how pregnancy occurred. I had to laugh when I read that. Farm girls do quite know well. There's a lot of farm animals out there. So, but nobody questioned this at all. Now, he claimed he never saw her and did not perform any operation on her. His witnesses weren't really all the best either. He had his wife, a brother-in-law, and two of his drinking buddies who all claimed she never visited him in his practice. How would they know that? They didn't work at his practice. She had a man that she insisted brought her to his practice, and he did testify, though some folks said that was impossible. He couldn't have been there the day that she claimed it happened. And they were seen talking in the hallway during the trial. So that was brought up that she was witness tampering. So it was quite interesting. But What did happen is Charles ended up, after 26 hours of jury deliberation and 100 ballots, there was one juror by the name of George Pence, interesting for Indiana as well, who was holding up the case. And I haven't found that he's related to any other Pences of that name. Um, he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 3 to 14 years at the Michigan City State Penitentiary. Now, immediately, the entire county went in an uproar. They didn't want to lose Charles. They wanted him. And so they immediately started 4 different petitions. Like, the ink wasn't even dry yet, and they were already getting names asking the Governor Hanley at the time to overturn the ruling, and he refused. The first petition, it got over 1,000 names, was by his wife Mary, who we know he had just beaten. He had been in court 2 weeks before this trial for an assault and battery charge on her. But she stuck with him, and it's interesting she got that many names. There were only 523 families living in Bluffton at that time. So to acquire 1,000 names that quickly, and they were all legit, that really tells you something about how the community felt about this verdict. They
Was
also
was he one of how many doctors, how many physicians were practicing in the
There were
community?
about 10, and
10?
all of
Okay.
them signed a petition in to have him released,
Okay.
along with all of the jurors and all of the lawyers in town. So they all these business people, the higher echelon of the society wanted him back, along with those that he had helped. And the jurors then, when the first 2 petitions didn't go through, they created a third petition just of their own with one stipulation, that if he was released, he no longer kept bulldogs. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of bulldog stories, and they were mean bulldogs. So that did make sense, but I had to laugh when I read that. Who puts that in a pardon request? And then finally, the last petitioner was the warden himself, who felt he didn't belong here. Now, while he was in prison for 3 years and 2 weeks, they did take his medical license away from him, revoke it for medical malpractice. And yet they let him serve as an attending physician in the penitentiary. It's Indiana. You can't even explain this stuff. Okay, so interestingly, when he got out, he had 2 things that were his objective. He wanted a full pardon from the governor so that he was no longer considered a felon, which he obtained fairly quickly. There was a new governor, a Governor Marshall. And then he wanted to get Indiana law changed so that at the time, once you had your medical license revoked, there was no way you could ever get it back. There was no appeal in it. It was done. And he didn't think that was fair. And so he set off to lobby legislators. And he found 2 that agreed with him. They wrote a bill. I am not making the name of the bill up. It's called the Butcher Bill. And he went ahead and he changed Indiana law. And today you can appeal it, all because of this rascal. Now, even though that did come about, it took years before they reinstated him, probably because they knew he was lying about his medical education. But eventually they did come around. Now, I wanted to say 2 things. One is, he wasn't all bad. I mean, I'm painting him awfully because this is all fact, and he did do awful things, but he did have a heart for animals and small children. He saved the life of a 12-year-old ice skater. She had fallen through the ice in the Wabash River across from his home. He heard kids screaming. He ran out and he dove in and saved her. And he loved his horses. He loved animals. A farmer brought him a German Shepherd that had broken his 2 front legs. The vet was going to put the dog to sleep. The farmer just didn't want to lose the dog. And Charles mended him. He put splints on the legs just like he would for a human. The dog lived a long and happy life afterwards. So he did have a side of him that was kind, But he did, the alcohol really seemed to influence everything. And he knew he had an alcoholic problem. He tried way back as early as 1892 to go to the Keeley Center, which was at the time a wildly well-known place to treat alcoholics. There were over 200 centers across the world, and one opened up in nearby Marion, a city in Indiana, close to where he was living. So for $100, you would spend 4 weeks there, and you would get 4 injections a day of what they called the gold cure. Now, it really was, they called it biochloride of gold. But this is what was in it: strychnine, alcohol, morphine, willow bark, ammonia, and atropine. Now, the journalist Nellie Bly, she went undercover in New York in 1894 to check out the place. And she wrote this huge expose on how it was simply medical malpractice. And we have to agree with her because we know it didn't change a darn thing. He continued to drink for many years. I'll tell you at the very end what finally made him stop drinking, and it was interesting that that occurred. But to get around being a doctor, he was really blatantly open about it. He wasn't hiding the fact that he didn't have a license. In the 1910 and 1920 censuses, he says he's a physician in general practice, but everybody knew he didn't have a license. He even employed some kind of scams to try to get around the systems. He teamed up a partnership with a Dr. Brown from next door, Adams County. And what hit the fan was one of Charles's patients died. It was a man by the name of Amos Warner. And Charles wrote the death certificate and signed it, and the coroner refused to accept it. And this was a problem because then they couldn't bury the man. And the coroner said, I can't accept it. You're not a licensed physician. So a new certificate was written, and Dr. Brown's name was attached to it. Now, Dr. Brown claims he never signed it and he wasn't that man's physician. We don't really know who signed it, though we kind of do know. Charles never admitted to it, but he never denied it either. The coroner refused to accept that either. So now we have this poor family that can't bury their loved one because there's no other physician who ever treated this man but Charles. And so no one will sign the death certificate. So how they solved it was the son had to go to court and get a special injunction allowing them to bury the body. To this day, there is no death certificate for Amos Warner in Indiana. It doesn't exist.
Wow.
And so, I mean, it's just unbelievable. But he eventually did get his license back in 1920. Now, I do have to share one of his drunken stories because the man that I met at the conference is the one that said this is his favorite story. And so one day, Charles decided to just, go out drinking. It was 1914, and he was being rather boisterous upon arrival at home. So the marshal came and was going to take him to jail to sleep it off. And he had to get some paperwork done. So he left Charles with his bottle, which was a major mistake, with the fire department driver, Ralph Davis. And he was going to Ralph was going to babysit Charles while the paperwork was done. Well, Charles dropped the bottle, and glass shattered everywhere. So Davis went to get a broom to clean up the mess. And Charles decided this was a great time to go home and sleep it off. So he escaped. When the marshal came back, he asked Davis what happened. Davis told him. The marshal said, don't worry about it. I suspect I know where he is. Marshal went to his house, found him deep in asleep in his own bed, and said, I don't have to do the paperwork. He can stay the night here. So you see, the community itself wasn't real helpful to him in that they enabled him to get away with so much of this. I don't really understand that part of it, but I wasn't living in that day and age either, so it is what it is.
I think it was accepted that there would be people who, would be like that, and it was
Yeah,
amazing that given that he had such a big problem with alcohol, it is amazing that they accepted him as a physician.
right. One that never went to school for it, and they all
Right,
knew that.
right, right,
I suspect, and this is just me talking, he's probably one of those physicians that today would give you antibiotics when you sneezed. You
right,
know, there are people that their demand. We have legitimate physicians in our family, and they tell us horror stories about how people get very argumentative
right.
and insisting on a treatment that isn't what they need. And I suspect he was the kind of guy. He probably wrote him a treatment for alcohol all the time. So they were quite happy with him.
Right. The other thing that surprised me was among all the people who signed these petitions to have him pardoned, included the jurors who voted him
Yes,
guilty.
twice,
Yeah,
twice. Yeah.
that's
I
crazy.
wonder if there wasn't a payoff or something behind the
Mm.
scenes. I
Hmm.
mean, because the whole thing is suspect. The way the trial went. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but looking at it, I just question, how did you have this wonderful team? He had a huge number of attorneys that he had retained. How did you not see to cross-examine these people? I could have done a better job at this. So to me, it seemed like there was an underlying, I think they thought they were going to eventually, maybe he was going to get guilty but a suspended sentence or something. I don't think they really thought he was going to end up going to Michigan City.
Right, right. And he did end up serving the
3 years
3 years,
and 2 weeks.
and the sentence was 3 to 14, so he was on
Right.
the
The only reason he had the additional 2 weeks is because the committee that had to do the pardons recessed.
okay. Well, that's a great story.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, when did he die? And did his wife
Well,
outlive him?
the end of his life, he did get reinstated in 1920. He had a bit ad he took out in the local newspaper saying his office was open. His office had been open, but he had a grand reopening celebration. I'm sure there was a lot of booze flowing that day too. Um, but he had two main events that ended his drinking. The first was in May of 1922. He drunk driving. He plowed through two wire fences, caused a lot of property damage. And the second was in January 23. He was so inebriated, he was driving on the sidewalk instead of the road and almost killed a child. And that's what shook him up enough to stop. He threw himself at the mercy of the court, and he never, that we know of, ever drank again. Or if he did it quietly at home. He was not seen carousing in the bars. He continued working as a physician until 3 weeks before he died, which was at age 80. He did have one more little event. In January of 1933, two men came to his office claiming to be patients, and when he had them in his exam room, they started pistol whipping him in the head. They wanted money. And Charles, being stubborn and headstrong in more ways than one, said, "You can keep beating me, but I'm not giving you a cent. And it's not even hurting me." So there. And, he was the baby of the family with one other younger brother. So he might have had a lot of scuffles growing up. But they eventually left empty handed. He got the flu in June. And the 12th of June, 1933, he did pass away. He's buried in Fairview Cemetery Mausoleum. And Mary Emma lived on in the house until 1953. She had senility, so she went to a retirement home for until she died in 1958, and she is buried next to him. Now, the sad part for me is I would love to have been able to show you a photo of him, but no photos exist of any of him or his brothers, and they all were kind of scandalous too. I don't know if that was on purpose. if they were camera shy, or if family members just didn't want to remember him. But I have searched far and wide. I have looked, I've checked with the prisons in Indiana, the police department in Bluffton, Indiana State Library, Indiana State Historical Association, the archives, and even Library of Congress. They have some mugshots there. Nobody has. And you would think with all these newspaper articles, somebody would have had a sketch or something. I have a description of him, but I don't have an actual picture. But you know what? All of these documents that survive really paints a vivid portrait of him anyway. So we'll just have to leave it at that.
Wow. Well, it is surprising there's no photograph. I mean, to have lived well into the 20th century, died in
Yeah.
1933, and for there to be no photograph, that's surprising. Now, his fourth and last wife, Mary, she was significantly younger than he was. But
She was younger than he was
yeah,
too.
but
He always married younger and younger. The first one was about his age, and then they started getting
yeah,
progressively younger. He
well,
liked marrying them between 17 and 20 years of
right.
age.
But he only had children with the first wife,
He
right?
only had the three children with the first wife.
That's surprising that he didn't have any more children with any of the other wives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very.
And the children were they, do you have evidence of what their relationship was with
The
him?
children, actually, I do with the two daughters. The oldest child and the youngest child were girls, and there are newspaper accounts where they came and visited him, or he came. The wife, his first wife, remarried a man and she was a farm wife at that point, and they relocated to Michigan. So the family was up in Michigan. He would go visit them. And they would come and visit him for different holidays, Thanksgiving, even his grandchildren were known to come and spend time with him in the summers. He also took in other family members at times. He took in a nephew, William, who was, I think he was 15. It was kind of a family scandal. And so that side of the family didn't tend to talk to him after that situation. What had happened is William's father was Robert, the man who was the defense attorney, and his parents were split. They hadn't divorced. It was going to end up being an ugly divorce, too. Dad went out west to seek his fame and fortune with mines. She remained in Ohio, and for whatever reason, the child William ended up in the household with Charles and with Mary, the fourth wife. And Charles went to court and claimed that William had stolen $50, a revolver, and some chickens. Now, the people that knew William insisted he would never have done anything like that. Now, we really don't know because it was sealed because it was juvenile court. But we really do know because it was Indiana and everybody was in everybody's business like they still are today. So we kind of know what really happened there. It is said that William took the $50 to give to Mary because she was planning on leaving Charles and she had no cash. And that he took the revolver away so that Charles wouldn't hurt himself or someone else because his behavior was so erratic. And that he never had anything to do with the chickens. So William was left off, and he was found not guilty. So, you know, who knows really what happened for sure.
Well, that's an interesting story. What now, are there any loose ends that you still have to research?
Well, after I put this all together this summer and realized how much I had on this man,
Yeah.
it was way too much for a newsletter because I was considering on giving it to Wells County, but it's like almost a chapter of a book, and I could actually even write more. So I just pulled the biggest events out there. Now, I'm thinking of probably turning it into a book and also researching the rest of the story, those other siblings. I'm descended from the youngest one, Frank, and he was a hellion too. Actually, and it's very sad. He beat my great grandmother so badly that she ended up dying younger. it would have been a murder charge today.
Wow.
A manslaughter charge
Yeah,
easily.
right.
But in those days, she ended up getting divorced from him, but did not live long after that last beating. And all of it is in the court records. So
Um,
it's very sad. They were heavily alcoholic. I really would love to understand better what that household was like when the parents were alive. There was one little clue. They moved to Mercer County from Holmes County, Indiana. And when the family first arrived in Holmes County, there is a cryptic one sentence in a mug book, those books that have the stories of biographies of people. Well, it was kind of like a county history in addition.
right.
And it said that these Scots Irish people that were coming, not only came, but they brought their liquor with them. So I suspect that it might have also been alcoholism with their parents as well, though I don't know that.
Well, this was a great story, and I appreciate you telling it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope your listeners enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed researching it.
Yeah, it's a great story. Thank you. Thanks for watching Black Sheep Family History, stories of our not so illustrious ancestors and how to find them. Remember to subscribe to the Black Sheep Family History channel on YouTube, and remember all the other ways that you can support this podcast and video series to keep these episodes coming. And if you have a Black Sheep story you'd like to share, or you'd like me to share, or if you need research help, drop me a note at janet@blacksheepfamhist.com. See you next time. Black Sheep Family History is produced, edited, and narrated by me, Janet Hall Werner. Educational extras are narrated by me. Music is created using Suno AI. Genealogical research is conducted by Black Sheep Family History guests, and educational extras are researched by me with assistance from AI tools ChatGPT and Perplexity AI. Sign up for the Black Sheep Society to receive bonus Black Sheep content to help you discover the Black Sheep in your family tree. Consider supporting the series by making a contribution through buymeacoffee.com. Subscribe to our channel, Black Sheep Family History, on YouTube, and search for Black Sheep Family History wherever you get your podcasts, and follow the show.